More players have withdrawn from this year's Australian Open, but let's take a look at the main one. Rafael Nadal announcing last week in Brisbane that he's withdrawing from this event due to injury. So he's out for this event. Dominic Streaker from Switzerland is also not playing this year's Australian Open. He defeated Stefanos Tsitsipas last year at the US Open in 5 sets, so he's bummed not to be playing the first Grand Slam down under, but he's dealing with an injury. Riley Opelka, the big serving the serve bot, also not playing this year's Australian Open due to an injury. And Nick Kyrgios, home favorite Aussie player, not playing this year's Australian Open, didn't even put himself on the entry list, but he's still dealing with some injuries. On the women's side, Belinda Bencic pulling out of this year's Australian Open because she's actually having a baby. Same with Petra Kvitova pulling out of this year's Australian Open because she's having a baby as well. Karolina Muchova still dealing with injuries from last year. She pulled out of the WTA Finals, and now she has to pull out of the Australian Open again due to injury. Madison Keys also pulling out of this year's Australian Open. And let's take a look at some players going into this year's Slam with an injury, starting off with Novak Djokovic going into the Australian Open with a wrist injury, suffered it in the United Cup. So we'll see how healthy he looks going into this year's Australian Open with a wrist injury. And Alina Svitolina played the final versus Coco Gauff, lost in 3 sets in Auckland, and she's coming into this year's Australian Open with a foot injury. So we'll see how these players are looking going into this year's tournament with some injuries.